Michael Stanton gripped his daughter's tiny hand tighter as they stood at the iron gates of the Whitmore Estate, staring up at the kind of mansion movies were made about. "Are we gonna live here?" 6-year-old Kelsey asked, her voice full of awe. "No, baby," Michael said, crouching to her level. "Daddy's just gonna work here. Remember, you're gonna go to school and Miss Diane will pick you up after and stay with you till I get back." Kelsey frowned, "But I want to stay with you." "I know," he kissed her forehead, "but this job is gonna help us. It's gonna make things better." He stood and buzzed the intercom. A moment later, the gates creaked open. Michael had been a construction foreman before the layoff. When his wife left 3 years ago, taking their savings and never looking back, he had no choice but to start over. This job live-in groundskeeper and handyman was the only thing that paid enough to cover Kelsey's school and their tiny apartment. It meant long hours and being away from her too much, but it was steady. And it was his shot. Inside, the estate stretched across hills and gardens like something out of a painting. The mansion itself was stone and glass, with high windows and carved balconies. A uniformed staff bustled in and out of the main doors. A woman stepped out onto the steps. She was tall, maybe 30, with long dark blonde hair pulled into a soft ponytail. She wore a white shirt tucked into tailored pants that looked like they cost more than Michael's car. But the way she looked at him, curious, not dismissive, human. "You must be Mr. Stanton," she said. Michael nodded. "Yes, ma'am, Michael, and this is my daughter Kelsey." The woman's gaze flicked to the little girl, and something in her face changed, softened. "I'm Lila Beaumont. This is my family's home." Her voice was calm, but there was something tired hiding behind it, like she hadn't spoken to anyone real in a long time. Lila turned to Kelsey. "Hi, Kelsey, do you like gardens?" Kelsey nodded. "There's a rose maze in the back. You'll have to see it sometime." She smiled gently, then looked back at Michael. "Come in, I'll show you where you'll be staying." The staff inside barely looked at him. Lila led him through the massive marble foyer, down a separate corridor that ended in modest but comfortable living quarters, 2 rooms, a kitchenette, and a bathroom. "This is yours, it's private," she said. "You'll have access to the whole property for your maintenance work. I'll leave a list each week." Michael nodded. "Thank you, I appreciate the opportunity." She gave him a tight smile. "You were the only applicant who didn't try to impress me, you just wanted the job. That said enough." Over the next few weeks, Michael fell into a rhythm. He dropped Kelsey at school, worked the grounds, fixed everything from pipes to paneling, and sometimes didn't see Lila for days. Other times, she'd appear out of nowhere watching him from a terrace, asking quiet questions about tools, or offering him cold lemonade like she was just a neighbor and not the heiress of a fortune. One Thursday afternoon, while replacing a broken light fixture on the back patio, Michael heard her voice behind him. "Do you ever stop working?" He turned, squinting in the sunlight. "Not really." She held out a glass. "You've earned a break." He took it, their fingers brushing for a second. She didn't pull hers back right away. "You don't talk like the others," she said softly. "I'm not like the others." Lila sat down on the edge of the fountain, her hands clasped. "I grew up in this house. My father built empires, but he never really looked at me. My mother passed when I was 10, and after that, it's like the walls got taller." Michael leaned against the edge of a pillar, watching her. "You're the first person here who talks to me like I'm a person, not a bank account, not a headline." He didn't know why, but that hit him hard. "I don't care about your money, Lila." She met his eyes, something vulnerable and aching flickering through hers. "I know." That night, he found a tiny pink dress hanging in his quarters with a note. For Kelsey, thought she might want to see the rose maze. The next afternoon, a staff member picked up Kelsey from school and brought her to the estate. Michael met them at the garden entrance, where Lila was already waiting, dressed casually, no makeup, hair in a braid, sneakers on. "Hi, Kelsey," she said, ready to explore. Kelsey nodded, already liking her. They walked the maze, winding paths together, the little girl running ahead, laughing as she disappeared around corners. Michael watched Lila laugh with her, really laugh. It was the first time he saw her look free. Later that night, after Kelsey had been picked up again, Michael found Lila sitting on the terrace with a glass of wine. "You're good with her," he said, stepping onto the flagstone. "I never had siblings, or a real childhood, honestly." "You missed out," he sat beside her. "She's everything to me." "I can tell." She glanced at him. "What about you, her mom?" "She left, said she wasn't built for the hard parts." Lila looked down. "I understand that," she said quietly. "People think money makes things easier, but it just hides the cracks." Michael looked at her, really looked. "You ever get tired of being alone in that house?" She nodded, barely. He reached over and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You're not alone right now." She looked at him, and for a moment everything else disappeared. The mansion, the money, the miles between their worlds. "I don't want you to be afraid of me," she whispered. "I'm not." She leaned in, hesitant, uncertain, and when she kissed him, it wasn't practiced or polished. It was real. And Michael knew, in that second, that this wasn't just a job anymore. Michael didn't expect her to speak to him again the next morning. But Lila was already outside when he stepped into the eastern garden, clipboard in hand, dressed not in her usual polished attire, but in soft jeans and a navy sweater that looked like it had seen real comfort. "You left early last night," she said, eyes on the row of orchids blooming along the trellis. "I had to pick up Kelsey," he replied, not moving from the gravel path. "Didn't want her staying with the sitter too long." She nodded, brushing her fingers over a leaf. "I liked last night." He hesitated, watching how the wind caught the ends of her braid. "It wasn't supposed to happen," he said after a moment. "Because you work here?" she asked, finally looking at him. "Because I don't want to confuse you," he replied, "or myself." She stepped closer. "You didn't seem confused when you kissed me back." Michael met her gaze, his jaw tight. "That's exactly the problem." She tilted her head. "So you regret it?" "No," he said, "I just don't know what it means." Neither of them spoke for a beat. Then she said, "Do you want to go for a drive?" Michael blinked. "Now." "I need to get out of here for a few hours. Come with me." He glanced at the pruning shears still in his hand. "I have work." "I'll call the house manager. You'll still get paid." He hesitated, then sighed. "Let me call Diane and make sure she can keep Kelsey a little longer." 20 minutes later, they were pulling onto the coastal highway in a sleek black convertible that clearly hadn't been driven much. Lila's sunglasses shielded her eyes, but Michael could see the way her fingers gripped the wheel like she needed the motion, the air, the freedom. "Where are we going?" he asked. "Somewhere no one will recognize me," she said, "and where no one will care who you are." The car wound along cliffs and dipped through quiet neighborhoods until they reached a tiny seaside town with weathered shops and a boardwalk that smelled like salt and old wood. She parked in a faded lot beside a seafood shack and stepped out without waiting. He followed her across the sand-strewn pavement toward a row of stalls selling handmade jewelry and watercolor paintings. "I used to come here with my aunt before she moved away," she said, pausing at a stand with wind chimes made from sea glass. "It's the only place I felt like could breathe." Michael picked up one of the chimes, its sound soft and irregular. "You don't breathe at home." She glanced at him. "No one breathes in that house, they perform." They wandered in silence a while, the ocean wind gusting around them. Lila bought a paper cup of lemonade and handed it to him without asking, then ordered one for herself. "You ever think about doing something else?" he asked as they leaned against the railing overlooking the water. "I used to want to write," she said, "but then the trust lawyers decided should be on boards and foundations instead." "You let them." I didn't know how to say no. Michael took a sip, the lemonade tart and cold. "That's not the woman I've seen." She turned toward him, her hair tangling in the breeze. "What woman have you seen?" "The one who found a pink dress for a little girl she just met," he said. "The one who kisses like it's the only way she remembers she's alive." Lila's cheeks flushed, but she didn't look away. "You make it hard to pretend," she said quietly. "Pretend what?" "That I don't want something real." The ride back was slower, quieter. Somewhere between the town and the estate, her hand found his across the console. He didn't pull away. When they returned, the staff had already lit the lanterns along the driveway. The sky was deepening to violet, and the air carried the scent of honeysuckle from the southern hedges. She parked near the side entrance instead of the front. "I don't want them watching me tonight," she said. Michael glanced toward the main house. "What are you saying?" "I want you to stay," she said. "Just for a while, not like last night, just be near." He should have said no. He should have reminded her of the line they were crossing. But instead, he nodded. She led him through a back corridor he hadn't seen before, past paintings in gilded frames and a glass case filled with antique clocks. Her sitting room was warm, filled with books and soft lamps instead of the sterile coldness of the rest of the mansion. She curled up on the couch with her legs tucked beneath her, and he took the chair across from her. For a long time, neither spoke. Then she said, "You know what the worst part of being rich is?" He shook his head. "Everyone thinks they already know you." Michael leaned forward. "I don't." "I know," she said. "That's why you're still here." She fell asleep on the couch not long after. Michael watched her for a moment, then rose quietly, found a folded blanket tucked behind the armchair, and covered her with it. He walked back to his quarters under a sky littered with stars, something tugging at his chest he hadn't felt in years. The next morning, she didn't call for him. Instead, the housekeeper handed him a note written in Lila's delicate handwriting. "Thank you for just being there. I didn't dream last night." He folded it once and tucked it into his wallet. And for the rest of the day, he couldn't stop thinking about what it would mean if he stopped pretending this was just a job. Because if he let himself believe it was more, there would be no going back. Michael barely slept. He kept waking in the quiet hours before dawn, his mind pulling him back to the image of Lila asleep on the couch, the way her hand had twitched slightly when he'd tucked the blanket around her, as if even in sleep she wasn't used to being cared for. By the time the sun rose, gold light pouring over the eastern slope of the estate, he was already outside checking the irrigation valves along the west garden. He didn't see her all morning. Not during his rounds through the greenhouse or while he adjusted the aging hinges on the solarium doors. But by early afternoon, as he hauled a fresh load of mulch to the lower orchard, a voice broke through the sound of birdsong and shovels. "I didn't know anyone actually used this part of the estate." Michael turned to find Lila standing at the edge of the slope in soft gray boots, her arms loosely crossed. She looked rested, but her eyes searched his face like she was unsure where they left off. "Most don't," he said, setting the shovel aside. "But the trees are still producing, just need a little help." She stepped closer, her gaze drifting toward the rows of pear trees. "I used to climb those when I was little," she said, "until one of the housekeepers told me bruises weren't appropriate for a young lady of stature." Michael raised a brow. "Didn't stop you, did it?" She gave a light laugh. "No, just started sneaking out instead." He wiped his hands on a rag, watching her carefully. "What are you really doing out here, Lila?" She looked away, then back at him. "There's going to be a benefit gala here in 2 weeks. My father's old foundation is hosting it. It was set before he passed, and the board wants me to carry it out." Michael frowned. "Do you want that?" "I don't know," she stepped closer. "But I was thinking, maybe you and Kelsey could come." Michael blinked, caught off guard. To a black tie benefit full of billionaires and politicians. She held his gaze. "Yes." He picked up the shovel again. "Lila, you know that's not my world." "I don't care about the world," she said. "I care about you. I want you there." He dug the shovel into the mulch pile. "Why?" "Because I don't want to walk into that ballroom alone. Not again." Michael was quiet for a moment, the weight of her words settling between them. Then he leaned one hand on the shovel's handle. "You realize bringing your groundskeeper to a gala will cause a mess." Lila's eyes didn't waver. "Let it." The next several days passed in a blur of preparation. The estate transformed white silk tents went up over the tennis courts, catering trucks arrived in the early mornings, and florists fussed over every arrangement like it was a matter of state. Staff rushed around with clipboards and earpieces, but Michael noticed that Lila remained calm, focused, even as the pressure mounted. She didn't visit the orchard again, but she left something in his quarters one evening, a box with a black suit inside, tailored and clearly expensive. No note this time, just the suit waiting. On the day of the gala, Diane agreed to stay overnight with Kelsey. Michael gave her an extra $50 and promised not to be late the next morning. Kelsey, in her pajamas, had grinned when he told her he was going to a fancy party. "If there's cake, bring me some," she'd whispered, hugging him tight. Now, standing in front of the gilded doors of the ballroom, Michael felt completely out of place. The suit fit perfectly, but it didn't feel like him. The air smelled like orchids and champagne. Violins floated from an unseen quartet. Inside, the richest people in the city raised glasses and exchanged rehearsed laughter. And then he saw her. Lila stood at the top of the grand staircase in a dress the color of deep twilight, her hair swept into an elegant twist. She wasn't wearing any jewelry except a delicate gold ring on her right hand. But she didn't need it. Every head turned when she appeared, but her gaze searched for only one face. When she found him, she descended the staircase slowly, her heels tapping against the marble. People stepped aside. "You came," she said, stopping in front of him. "You didn't really give me a choice." She smiled, not the polite one she gave strangers, but something real. "I'm glad." They moved together through the crowd, and Michael noticed how people stared. Some whispered. Some simply looked confused. A man in his 60s, with a pinched expression, stepped forward near the champagne fountain. "Lila," he said tightly, "you've brought a guest." "Yes," she said, her voice even. "Michael Stanton." The man's eyes flicked over him with thinly veiled disdain. "A pleasure." Michael nodded once. "Likewise." Lila didn't linger. She took Michael's arm and steered them toward the terrace. "I take it that was someone important," he said once they were outside. "Chairman of the board," she replied. "He thinks I'm ruining my father's legacy." "Because of me." "No," she said, "because I don't let him treat me like a puppet." Michael turned to face her fully. "I need to ask you something." She looked up at him. "Why now?" he asked. "Why me?" Lila's throat worked. "Because you saw me before I even knew I needed to be seen, and because I haven't felt like myself in years until you." She stopped, breath catching. Michael stepped closer. "Until I what?" "Until you looked at me like I wasn't something to be inherited or managed, like I was just a woman." He reached up, brushing his fingers along her jaw. "You're not just a woman, Lila. You're the first thing that's made me believe could want something again." She leaned in, her hand resting lightly on his chest, and whispered, "Then take it." He kissed her as the lights from the ballroom spilled across the marble terrace, their silhouettes framed against the night. Somewhere behind them, a waiter dropped a tray. Music swelled. Applause echoed from the east wing. But none of it touched them. Later that night, after they slipped away from the party and walked the back gardens in silence, Lila stopped beside the old sundial and turned to him. "I want to show you something tomorrow," she said. "What is it?" "My father's will was finalized this week. There's something in it I didn't expect. Something that changes things." Michael's brow tightened. "What kind of something?" Her voice dropped. "Own the estate now, all of it, no more trustees, no more board." He stepped back slightly. "That's a lot of power." "Yes," she said, "but I don't want to use it the way they expect." He studied her. "Then how?" "I want to start over," she said, "and I want you in it." Michael didn't answer right away. The air between them felt heavier than before, not uncertain, just full. "Then show me tomorrow," he said at last. "I'll be here." She touched his hand just once, before walking back toward the house. And Michael stood there, surrounded by roses, realizing that nothing about his life was the same anymore, and maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what he'd been waiting for. It was raining the next morning hard. The kind of downpour that made the garden trails slick and turned the citrus grove into a maze of dripping branches. Michael stood by the window of his quarters, watching the sheets of water streak the glass, his tie still undone. The suit from the gala hung on a hook behind him, but today he wore jeans and a dark button-down. Lila had asked him to meet her in the East Wing study at 9. He checked his watch. It was already 20 past. By the time he reached the East Wing, the storm had thickened. The staff had mostly retreated, leaving the halls quiet except for the faint ticking of the estate's antique clocks. The study door was ajar. Lila stood by the fireplace, her back to him, wearing a slate blue blouse and slacks, her hair slightly damp from the rain. The fire crackled low, casting golden light against the bookshelves and the oil paintings of her ancestors staring down with solemn expressions. "You're late," she said without turning. "You're early," he replied. She glanced over her shoulder, her eyes different today, clearer, steadier. "I didn't sleep much." He closed the door behind him. "You said you wanted to show me something." She stepped to the desk and opened a lacquered drawer, pulling out a folder. "My father left me this letter. It was sealed until the lawyers finished sorting the estate." Michael stepped forward, taking it slowly when she held it out. The envelope was creased at the edges, the handwriting formal but unmistakably personal. Inside was a single sheet. "I didn't read it until last night," she said as he scanned the contents. He never said it out loud, but he knew he failed me. Michael's brows lowered as he reached the last line. "He left you the entire estate personally," he said, looking up. "Not the foundation, not the board." Her voice was low, because he thought I might finally do something different with it. He set the letter down. "What does that mean?" Lila walked to the window, pressing a hand against the cool glass as thunder rolled in the distance. "I want to turn the estate into something open, not just a monument to wealth," she turned. "A private learning center for kids who don't get chances. Workshops, gardens, a place that teaches them how to build something with their hands or grow something or write something that matters." Michael's breath caught. "You'd change all this." "Not change," she said. "Free it, let it breathe." He stared at her, the woman who'd once seemed like a porcelain statue in a glass house. Now, she stood like someone who had decided not to be afraid anymore. "I want you to help me build it," she said. "You know what it's like to start over with nothing. You know how to create something real." Michael didn't answer right away. He walked toward the fire and rested one hand on the edge of the mantel. "What about everyone who thinks this place should stay exactly the same?" he asked. She crossed the room until she was beside him. "Let them try to stop me," she said softly. "I don't care what they think anymore." He looked at her, and something in his chest shifted. "I'm not just going to be your contractor, Lila." "I know. I'm a father. I can't afford to get this wrong." She reached for his hand. "Then don't get it right with me." He didn't move, letting the silence stretch between them, filled only by the storm outside. Then his voice dropped. "I'm scared." "Me too," she whispered, "but I'd rather be scared with you than safe with anyone else." He kissed her, but this time it wasn't about escape or impulse. It was about everything they hadn't said, everything they were finally ready to risk. Later that week, Lila held a press conference on the estate grounds, standing beneath a white canopy while reporters gathered in the rain. Michael watched from the rear edge, his arm around Kelsey, who held a bright pink umbrella and refused to wear shoes. Lila's voice was calm, but firm as she announced the transformation of the Whitmore Estate into the Beaumont Center for growth and creativity. She thanked her late father for the resources, but made it clear the future would not be a mirror of the past. Afterward, she found Michael and Kelsey under the awning near the stables. "You were incredible," he said as she approached. "I was terrified," she admitted, brushing a strand of wet hair from her cheek. Kelsey tugged at her hand. "Can I help with the new garden?" Lila crouched beside her. "You can help design it. We'll call it Kelsey's Corner." Kelsey beamed, and Michael felt something in his throat tighten. That night, as they walked the now quiet halls toward the wing Lila had decided to convert into classrooms, she paused outside one of the empty rooms. "This was my mother's music room," she said. "I haven't been in here since I was 10. Michael opened the door for her. The room smelled faintly of dust and old wood. A grand piano sat under a dust cover, and faded sheet music was still stacked on the stand. "She used to play in the afternoons," Lila murmured. "After she died, the sound just stopped." Michael walked to the window and opened it, letting the breeze push through the curtains. "Maybe it's time to let it start again." She looked at him, her eyes full. "I think it already has." They spent the rest of the evening talking about building plans, classroom ideas, what to name the workshops. She asked for his input on everything, never once treating him like someone beneath her. And he stopped feeling like he had to prove he belonged. 2 months later, the first section of the estate reopened not as an opulent retreat, but as a vibrant, living space. Kelsey helped plant the first vegetables in the teaching garden. Local kids started signing up for weekend programs, and Michael found himself waking up every morning not wondering how to survive, but how to grow something lasting. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Lila led him up to the rooftop terrace they'd never used before. There was a long table set with candles and flowers, and a small band playing softly in the background. Kelsey sat with Diane at one end, playing with a coloring book. Michael turned to Lila, confused. "What is this?" She smiled, nervous. "A thank you dinner." "For what?" "For seeing me, for believing in me, for being the first man who didn't want to fix me, just stand with me." Then she reached into her pocket and held out a small velvet box. His chest tightened. "Lila." "It's not what you think," she said quickly, opening it. Inside was a simple silver band etched with a pattern of ivy branches. "I don't need a grand ceremony, just need this. You, Kelsey, and the life we're building." He looked at her, overwhelmed. Then he pulled her into his arms. "Yes," he said, his voice breaking. "Yes to all of it." They kissed as the music swelled behind them, and Kelsey let out a cheer from the other end of the table. And for the first time in years, Michael Stanton wasn't struggling. He was home. The first wedding was quiet. Not secret, just small. Lila didn't want headlines or op-eds or anonymous commentary from people who'd never known her as anything but a last name. She didn't want the ballroom or the press. She wanted a morning ceremony beneath the arbor in the citrus grove, barefoot in the grass, with Kelsey dropping wildflowers along the aisle as she laughed and twirled in her sundress. Michael wore an open collar and no tie. Lila wore a gauzy, sleeveless dress the color of early fog, her hair loose and swept back with a single ivory pin. They'd invited only 12 people who mattered. Diane, of course, sat beside the new program director for the Beaumont Center, who'd once been a student in the first pilot class. A retired botanist who now taught weekend classes officiated, his voice steady and warm. When Lila said, "I do," she didn't cry. But her voice caught the second she looked down at Kelsey, who beamed up at her from Michael's side. "You gave me both of them," she whispered. "How could I not?" After the short vows, Kelsey grabbed both their hands and insisted they spin together in the grass, the three of them laughing as petals stuck to their feet, and the breeze carried the scent of lemons through the trees. That night, they didn't leave the estate. There were no flights, no luxury hotels. Just the rooftop terrace, strung with soft lights and candles that flickered low as the stars rose. A local chef cooked a meal just for them, served on the same table where Lila had slipped the silver band into Michael's hand 2 months before. "Do you ever think about how close we were to never meeting?" she asked, resting her chin on her folded arms as they watched the city lights blink in the distance. Michael traced his fingers over hers. "Sometimes, I think about how many things had to go wrong for everything to go right." She turned her head toward him. "Would you change any of it?" He shook his head, "Not 1 second of it." She smiled, but this time it was different, more like relief than happiness. Like she'd finally exhaled the last breath of a life that hadn't fit. "I used to think I'd never belong to anything," she said, "not even myself." Michael leaned in and kissed her temple. "You belong here," he said, "to us, always." They didn't need to say anything else. A year later, the Beaumont Center had grown beyond what either of them imagined. The orchard had been fully restored, and the old stable had become a creative studio for art and design. Kelsey had started first grade and insisted on giving tours to new students, referring to herself as the junior director. One afternoon, while Lila was helping plant lavender along the southern wall, Michael came running from the greenhouse with his hands covered in dirt and a piece of paper fluttering in his grip. She stood up, brushing her knees. "What happened?" He held it out, grinning like a man who just won a lottery. "It's from the city council. The grant came through. We got full funding to expand the program into Eastbrook." Lila stared at him, stunned. "You mean we're opening the second center?" He nodded, "And they want us to present the model at the regional summit." She laughed, throwing her arms around his neck. "You did it." "We did it," he said, spinning her once in the grass. Later that week, when the sun had dipped low and the shadows stretched long across the lawn, Michael found Lila sitting against a tree near the rose maze, her knees drawn up and a book resting on her lap. He sat beside her without speaking. She handed him the book, started writing again. He looked at the open page. The handwriting was neat, steady. The first line read, "Some women are born into castles, others learn how to build them." He kept reading, his lips pressed together. "I didn't want to wait anymore," she said. "I want to tell the story the way it really happened." Michael closed the book and set it gently on the grass. "And how did it really happen?" She leaned against his shoulder. "I fell in love with a man who saw me before I saw myself, and the rest of it stopped mattering." He kissed her slowly, their fingers twining together in the grass. That night, as Kelsey slept upstairs after begging for one more chapter from a book Lila had written just for her, Michael stood in the kitchen pouring tea into 2 ceramic mugs Lila had made herself in the center's ceramics class. She padded in barefoot, wearing one of his old shirts, her hair tousled, eyes soft. He handed her the mug. "You like it here?" he asked. She leaned against the counter. "I love it here." He brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "I was thinking." "Dangerous," she teased. "I want to build a little cabin out by the orchard. Nothing big, just a place we can go when we want to be away from everything." She tilted her head. "A retreat." "A home," he said, "one we make from the ground up, together." She nodded once, then let's do it. By the end of the second year, the cabin stood nestled in the trees, with wide windows and shelves lined with books and toys. They spent weekends there, Kelsey running wild between the lemon trees and the tiny path that led back to the rose maze. And one late spring evening, as Michael stood on the porch watching fireflies dance through the orchard, Lila stepped beside him, barefoot and glowing. "I have something to tell you," she whispered. He looked at her, already sensing it. She placed his hand gently on her stomach. Kelsey would be a big sister. They didn't plan a second wedding. They didn't need one. Their life was full, the kind of full that filled every room, every hour, every breath, not with noise or extravagance, but with something quieter, realer. And on the nights when the world felt too fast, they'd find each other in the garden or the terrace or the orchard. No audience, no stage. Just 2 people who'd once met on opposite sides of a gate and never walked away again.